The police cruiser's red and blue lights splashed across Lorraine Mitchell's living room walls as she pressed her trembling body against the hallway corner, watching two officers step through her front door without permission. Her daughter Simone stood on the porch behind them, arms crossed, face carved from stone in satisfaction. Blood trickled from Lorraine's split lip where Simone had struck her 15 minutes earlier, the copper taste still coating her tongue. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I start my story, I would love to know what city you are joining me from. Feel free to share it in the comments. Now, let me immerse you in this story. Lorraine's fingers dug into the wallpaper, her arthritic knuckles screaming as she fought to stay upright. The taller officer moved through her home with practiced efficiency, his boots tracking mud across the cream carpet she'd vacuumed that morning. His partner, a younger woman with sharp eyes, approached Lorraine with hands raised in a placating gesture. "Mrs. Mitchell, we received a call about a disturbance," the female officer said, her voice soft but firm. "My daughter broke into my house and attacked me." Lorraine straightened her spine, ignoring the pain radiating through her ribs where Simone's fist had connected. She pointed toward the shattered lamp on the floor, its ceramic base in 3 jagged pieces. Simone stepped inside, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood. She'd changed into a silk blouse and pearls, transforming from the wild-eyed woman who'd been screaming obscenities into a picture of concerned elegance. Lorraine's stomach clenched at the performance about to unfold. "Officers, I'm so sorry you had to come out here." Simone's voice dripped with manufactured worry as she approached the female officer. "My mother has been having these episodes for months now. Her dementia makes her paranoid and aggressive." Lorraine lunged forward, her hands balling into fists. The male officer stepped between them, his solid frame blocking her path. She could smell his aftershave, something woody and harsh that made her nose itch. "That's a lie! I don't have dementia!" Lorraine's voice cracked, desperation clawing up her throat. "She's been stealing from me, forging checks from my account. I caught her today, and she attacked me when I said I'd report her." The female officer's expression shifted, sympathy bleeding into skepticism. Lorraine recognized that look, had seen it bloom across her neighbors' faces over the past 3 months. Whatever poison Simone had been spreading was already taking root. Simone produced her phone with theatrical precision, swiping through screens before holding it out to the officers. "This is from her neurologist, Dr. Patterson. The diagnosis was confirmed in January." Lorraine's breath caught in her chest. She watched the officers lean in, studying the screen. The male officer's shoulders relaxed, his hand moving away from his belt. The document looked official, complete with letterhead and signature. Lorraine had never seen Dr. Patterson for anything except her annual physical. "That's forged," Lorraine whispered, but the words came out weak, unconvincing even to her own ears. The room tilted sideways. Lorraine gripped the wall, her vision swimming as realization crashed over her. This wasn't spontaneous. Simone had been building this narrative for months, carefully laying groundwork, manipulating reality until up became down and truth became delusion. The conversations with neighbors about Mom's confusion, the concerned calls to Lorraine's friends about memory problems, the subtle campaign of character assassination disguised as filial devotion. Story block 2. Lorraine's knees buckled. She caught herself against the doorframe, her arthritic fingers digging into painted wood. The male officer moved toward her, his hand extended in that careful way people approached frightened animals. She jerked away from his touch, her spine pressing against the wall. Through the doorway, She could see her living room transformed into a stage for Simone's performance. The female officer circled the coffee table, her boots silent on the hardwood Lorraine had refinished herself last spring. She picked up the pill organizer sitting beside Lorraine's reading glasses. The clear, plastic compartments rattled as she turned it over, examining labels that Lorraine had never seen before. Names she couldn't pronounce, printed in crisp pharmacy labels. "Mrs. Mitchell, are you taking your medications regularly?" The officer's voice carried that overly gentle tone reserved for children and the confused elderly. Lorraine shook her head, then stopped, realizing how the gesture would be interpreted. Her hands trembled as she pushed away from the wall, forcing her legs to support her weight. She crossed the room in measured steps, each footfall deliberate, controlled. She would not shuffle, would not display any behavior that could be twisted into evidence of decline. "Those aren't mine," she said, reaching for the pill organizer. Simone intercepted her, fingers closing around Lorraine's wrist with surprising strength. "Mom, please. You know Dr. Patterson prescribed these." She turned to the officers, her eyes glistening with manufactured tears. "She refuses to take them. Says they're poison, that I'm trying to drug her." The leather of the male officer's duty belt creaked as he shifted his weight. His nameplate caught the overhead light. Rodriguez. Lorraine memorized it, clinging to concrete details as her world unraveled. He exchanged glances with his partner, an entire conversation passing in that look. Lorraine had seen social workers use the same nonverbal shorthand in her 30 years as a high school guidance counselor. She wrenched her arm free from Simone's grip, stumbling backward. The coffee table caught her behind the knees, sending framed photographs sliding across the glass surface. Her late husband Marcus's face smiled up from their 40th anniversary photo, frozen in a moment when life had made sense. The female officer knelt beside the couch, retrieving something from beneath the dust ruffle. She stood slowly, holding a checkbook between gloved fingers. Lorraine's stomach dropped. She kept her checks in the locked drawer of her bedroom desk, had verified their location just that morning when she'd discovered the forged withdrawal. "Mrs. Mitchell, is this your checkbook?" Officer Rodriguez moved closer, his bulk filling her peripheral vision. Lorraine nodded, her throat too tight for words. She watched him flip through the register, his finger tracing recent entries. Her own handwriting stared back at her from the pages, but the numbers were wrong. Payments to cash, amounts she'd never written, all dated within the last month. "I didn't write those." The words emerged hoarse, desperate. Simone sank onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. The officers responded like puppets on strings, their body language softening, protective instincts triggered by the grieving daughter forced to witness her mother's mental deterioration. Lorraine's hands clenched into fists at her sides. The physical therapist had praised the strength she'd maintained, had marveled at her grip during last week's session. She could feel that power now, coiled in her muscles, demanding release. She imagined crossing the room, her fingers wrapping around Simone's throat, squeezing until truth spilled from those lying lips. Instead, she forced her hands open, spreading her fingers wide against her thighs. She inhaled through her nose, counting to 4, holding the breath like her yoga instructor taught. The officers were watching, evaluating, gathering evidence for conclusions already drawn. Rodriguez stepped between Lorraine and the couch, his positioning casual but deliberate. His partner moved to the doorway, blocking the exit. The choreography was subtle, professional. They'd shifted from responding to a possible assault to managing a mental health crisis. "Ma'am, I think it would be helpful if you came with us to the hospital," Rodriguez said. "Just to get checked out, Make sure you're not hurt. Lorraine's pulse hammered against her temples. The hospital meant evaluations, psychiatric holds, documented evidence of confusion and paranoia. It meant giving Simone exactly what she needed: official records to support the dementia narrative. The carpet fibers pressed against Lorraine's bare feet as she shifted her weight backward, creating distance from Rodriguez's extended hand. Her toes curled against the cream-colored pile, seeking purchase, preparing for movement. The officer's fingers hung in the air between them, palm up, a gesture meant to appear supportive, but designed to guide her toward the door, toward the squad car waiting outside, toward the psychiatric ward where her daughter's lies would become documented truth. Behind Rodriguez, Simone dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, the paper catching mascara that hadn't actually run. Lorraine tracked the motion, cataloging the performance. Her daughter's shoulders trembled in rhythmic intervals. Too perfect, too measured. Real grief was messier than that. Real grief didn't follow a metronome. Lorraine's jaw clenched so hard her molars ached. She rolled her shoulders back, spine straightening, pulling herself to her full height. 5'9", taller than Simone, matching Rodriguez's eye level. Her reflection caught in the hallway mirror. Silver hair pulled into its usual neat bun, navy cardigan buttoned correctly, pressed slacks without a wrinkle. Nothing about her appearance suggested confusion or deterioration. "I'm not going to any hospital." The words emerged level, controlled. She kept her hands visible at her sides, fingers loose despite every instinct screaming to clench them again. Rodriguez's expression shifted into practiced sympathy, the look social workers and crisis responders perfected in training seminars. His partner, the younger officer whose name tag read Chen, pulled a notebook from his belt, pen clicking open with a sharp snap that echoed through the living room. "Ma'am, your daughter says you've been having some memory issues lately," Chen said, pen hovering over the blank page. "Have you been eating regularly? Taking your medications?" The notebook tilted at an angle that let Lorraine see her name already written at the top of the page. Mitchell, Lorraine, age 65. Below it, Chen had drawn a line and written a single word. Dementia? Her breath caught in her chest, trapped behind her ribs. The question mark did nothing to soften the accusation, the assumption, the verdict already forming. She watched Chen's pen move, adding more notes she couldn't quite read from this distance. Her vision tunneled, edges going dark. No. She forced air into her lungs, forced the darkness back. Panic was what they expected, what Simone needed her to demonstrate. Lorraine pressed her tongue against the roof of her mouth, concentrated on the texture, the slight ridge behind her front teeth. Dr. Patel had taught her this grounding technique during the grief counseling sessions after Marcus died. Focus on something physical, something immediate, something real. Marcus. His name was an anchor, heavy and solid. Her husband's death 6 months ago had been sudden, an aneurysm during his morning jog. No warning, no chance for goodbye. The funeral had been packed with colleagues from the school district where he'd served as principal for 23 years. Simone had stood beside her at the graveside, gripping her arm, whispering condolences to the mourners who filed past. When had the grip shifted from support to control? Lorraine moved toward the bookshelf, her movements deliberate, non-threatening. She selected a leather-bound planner from the second shelf, the one Marcus had given her last Christmas. Her fingers traced the embossed initials on the cover, LM, before opening to today's date. Thursday, May 15th, she read aloud. Physical therapy at 10, lunch with Janet Coleman at noon, garden club meeting at 3. Home by 5 to find my daughter and some man named Derek in my living room, going through my financial documents. She held the planner open, turning it toward Rodriguez. Each page was filled with her neat handwriting, appointments logged, tasks completed with check marks, notes about conversations and events. 6 months of detailed records, organized, coherent, the documentation of a mind that tracked time and remembered commitments. Rodriguez's eyes scanned the pages, his expression flickering with something that might have been doubt. Chen stepped closer, peering over his partner's shoulder, pen stilling against the notebook. "Mom keeps very detailed journals," Simone said from the couch, her voice carrying that careful blend of sadness and patience. "Her doctor said it's common for people with early-stage dementia to become obsessive about writing things down. They're trying to compensate for the gaps in their memory?" The planner slipped in Lorraine's grip, her palm suddenly slick with sweat. She adjusted her hold, fingers leaving damp marks on the leather. Simone had twisted every piece of evidence, turned every strength into a symptom. The yoga classes became wandering. The volunteer work at the library became confusion about where she lived. The standing lunch dates with Janet became inability to recognize old friends. Her daughter was building a cage from lies, and every bar fit perfectly into place. The front door swung open without a knock, wood banging against the interior wall hard enough to rattle the framed photographs in the hallway. Lorraine's head snapped toward the sound, her pulse jumping beneath her throat. Derek strode in first, his expensive loafers clicking against her hardwood floors with the confidence of ownership. Behind him came a woman in a charcoal suit, her blonde hair pulled into a severe bun that made her sharp features look almost predatory. "Simone called us," Derek said, not bothering with pleasantries. He set a leather briefcase on Lorraine's coffee table without asking, the metal clasps clicking open under his thick fingers. "Officer Rodriguez, Officer Chen, I'm Derek Patterson, Mrs. Mitchell's financial advisor. This is Angela Reeves from Adult Protective Services." Rodriguez stepped back from Lorraine, creating distance that felt like abandonment. Chen closed her notebook, pen disappearing into her uniform pocket. The living room suddenly felt too small, too crowded, the walls pressing inward as Angela Reeves moved through the space with practiced efficiency. Her eyes swept over everything, the neat stacks of mail on the side table, the organized bookshelves, the photos of Lorraine with Janet at the community center. Lorraine's fingers tightened around her planner until the leather edges bit into her palm. She tried to catch Rodriguez's attention, to hold his gaze and make him see what was happening, but he'd already turned toward Derek. The officer's body language had shifted, shoulders angling away from her, gravitating toward the people who spoke with professional authority and carried official credentials. "We've been monitoring the situation for several weeks," Derek said, pulling documents from his briefcase. His movements were smooth, rehearsed, like he'd performed this scene before. "Mrs. Mitchell has been making unusual withdrawals, paying bills twice, forgetting about automatic payments. Last month, she tried to wire $20,000 to what was clearly a scam operation. We stopped the transfer, but she became agitated, claimed we were stealing from her." The lie hit Lorraine's chest like a physical blow. She lunged forward, reaching for the documents Derek was spreading across her coffee table, but Angela Reeves intercepted her. The woman's hand closed around Lorraine's wrist, not roughly, but with unmistakable firmness, fingers pressing against the thin skin over bone. "Mrs. Mitchell, let's sit down and talk calmly." Angela's voice carried the kind of soothing tone people used with frightened animals. She guided Lorraine backward toward the armchair, applying steady pressure that made resistance feel futile. Lorraine yanked her arm free, stumbling against the chair's edge. Her hip connected with the armrest, pain blooming hot and immediate. She caught herself on the chair back, knuckles white against the upholstery. "I never tried to wire any money. Those are my accounts, my statements. You can see every transaction I've made." No one looked at her. Derek was pointing to highlighted sections on bank statements, his finger tapping against numbers, while Rodriguez leaned in closer. Chen had moved toward the kitchen doorway, her attention drawn to something beyond Lorraine's line of sight. Simone remained on the couch, hands folded in her lap, face arranged in an expression of weary concern that looked almost genuine in its practiced perfection. Angela pulled a tablet from her shoulder bag, fingers swiping across the screen. "Mrs. Mitchell, I need to ask you some questions. Can you tell me what day it is?" The condescension in her tone made Lorraine's teeth clench hard enough to make her jaw ache. She forced herself to breathe through her nose, to maintain control even as fury pulsed behind her eyes. "It's Thursday, October 12th. It's 2:15 in the afternoon. I had lunch with Janet Coleman at the Harbor Cafe. We split the salmon special and talked about the fundraiser for the library renovation." Angela's expression didn't change. She tapped something into her tablet, stylus making soft clicking sounds against the glass. "And can you tell me who the president is?" Heat flooded Lorraine's face, spreading down her neck. She opened her mouth, then closed it, words tangling on her tongue. The question was designed to humiliate, to reduce decades of intelligence and experience to an elementary school test. Behind Angela, she could see Simone watching, dark eyes glittering with something that might have been satisfaction. "I'm not answering these ridiculous questions in my own home." Lorraine's voice came out stronger than she felt, each word pushed through the constriction in her throat. Angela made another note on her tablet. "Defensive behavior, refusal to cooperate with cognitive assessment." Derek had moved to the bookshelf, his fingers trailing along the spines until he reached the small wooden box where Lorraine kept important papers. He lifted it down without asking permission, setting it beside his briefcase. The brass latch clicked under his thumb. Inside were her insurance policies, her will, the deed to the house her husband had paid off 3 years before his death. Lorraine surged forward, but Angela blocked her path. The woman positioned herself between Lorraine and the coffee table, arms crossed over her chest, posture radiating authority. Rodriguez glanced up from Derek's documents, his eyes meeting Lorraine's for a brief second before sliding away. Whatever doubt he'd felt when looking at her planner had evaporated under the weight of professional credentials and official procedures. "The power of attorney documents are here," Derek said, extracting papers from Lorraine's wooden box. He laid them out with the reverence of someone handling evidence, smoothing the pages flat. "Simone filed these last week. Given Mrs. Mitchell's declining capacity, the bank will need to transfer account oversight for her protection." The words crashed through Lorraine like a wave, stealing breath from her lungs. Her hand shot out, grabbing the back of the couch for support. The fabric bunched under her grip, seams straining. Power of attorney. Simone had already moved forward with the plan, had already signed documents and filed paperwork, while Lorraine thought there was still time to fight. "I never agreed to that." The words came out hoarse, barely audible over the rushing sound in her ears. Simone stood slowly, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her skirt. She crossed the room to Lorraine, each step measured and deliberate. When she reached her mother, she placed a hand on Lorraine's shoulder, fingers curling gently against the thin fabric of her blouse. To anyone watching, it would look like comfort. Lorraine felt the pressure behind it, the weight of control asserting itself. "It's for your own good, Mom." Simone's breath was warm against Lorraine's ear, her voice pitched low enough that only her mother could hear the edge beneath the sweetness. "Stop fighting, and this stays simple." Lorraine twisted away from Simone's grip, stumbling backward until her hip collided with the armrest. The impact sent a jolt of pain up her side, but she welcomed it. Something real, something solid in a moment when everything else felt like quicksand. Her daughter's hand hung suspended in the air where her shoulder had been, fingers still curved in that possessive arc. Janet stood frozen by the window, her knuckles white against the curtain fabric. Her eyes darted between Lorraine and the papers spread across the coffee table like autopsy reports. Derek gathered the documents methodically, tapping their edges into alignment before sliding them back into his leather portfolio. The metal clasp clicked shut with the finality of a prison door. "I need to see my own lawyer." Lorraine's voice came out stronger this time, each word deliberately placed. She moved toward the telephone on the side table, her slippers shuffling across the hardwood. Simone intercepted her path, positioning herself between Lorraine and the phone with the casual precision of someone blocking a chess move. She didn't touch her mother this time, didn't need to. Her presence alone created a wall. "Mom, you're getting agitated. This is exactly the kind of behavior Dr. Phillip noted in his assessment." Simone turned slightly, addressing Janet and Derek as witnesses. "The paranoia, the resistance to help from family members." The words hung in the air like poisonous smoke. Lorraine watched Janet's expression shift, that flicker of doubt creeping back into her eyes despite everything they'd discussed earlier. The neighbor's gaze dropped to the floor, her earlier conviction wavering. Derek closed his portfolio and stood, adjusting his tie with one hand. The gold wedding band on his finger caught the afternoon light streaming through the window. He moved toward the door, his role apparently complete for now. Simone followed him into the hallway, their voices dropping to murmurs that Lorraine couldn't decipher through the rushing blood in her ears. Lorraine's knees buckled slightly, and she sank onto the couch. The cushions compressed under her weight, springs creaking with age. Her hands trembled in her lap, fingers interlacing and squeezing until the joints ached. Through the open doorway, she could see Simone's perfectly manicured hand resting on Derek's forearm, her head tilted in that practiced angle of concern and conspiracy. Janet crossed the room, her movements hesitant now, apologetic. She lowered herself onto the couch beside Lorraine, but maintained a careful distance, as if uncertainty had created a physical barrier between them. Her fingers worried at the hem of her cardigan, pulling loose a thread that began to unravel. The front door closed with a soft click. Simone returned alone, her heels tapping a steady rhythm against the floor. She moved to the kitchen, opening cabinets with familiar ease. This house where she'd grown up, these rooms she could navigate blindfolded. Water ran in the sink. Glass clinked against granite. Lorraine's mind raced, calculating options that seemed to collapse before fully forming. Her purse sat on the chair by the door, car keys nestled inside. But Simone stood between her and escape, and even if she reached the door, where would she go? The bank would believe the power of attorney documents. Her doctor, Dr. Phillip, whom she'd trusted for 15 years, had apparently written an assessment declaring her incompetent. Simone emerged from the kitchen carrying a glass of water and a small orange prescription bottle. She set both on the coffee table in front of Lorraine, the pills rattling like dice in a cup. The label faced outward. Lorraine Mitchell, take 1 tablet twice daily as needed for anxiety. "Time for your medication, Mom." Simone unscrewed the cap, shaking 2 pills into her palm. They were small and white, innocuous looking, but Lorraine couldn't remember Dr. Phillip prescribing anything new. Her regular medications sat in the bathroom cabinet, organized in their daily dispenser. Lorraine's hand shot out, knocking the glass sideways. Water cascaded across the coffee table in a crystalline wave, soaking the magazines stacked there, dripping onto the carpet below. The pills tumbled from Simone's hand, one bouncing under the couch, the other landing in the spreading puddle. "I'm not taking anything." Lorraine pushed herself up from the couch, her legs steadier now, adrenaline overriding the weakness. "Get out of my house!" Simone's composure cracked, just for a moment, a flash of something raw and angry crossing her features before the mask slammed back into place. She grabbed Lorraine's wrist, her grip tight enough to leave marks. Her thumb pressed against the delicate bones, finding pressure points with practiced ease. "You don't get to make that decision anymore." The words came out through clenched teeth, barely above a whisper, but vibrating with restrained fury. "The papers are filed. The assessment is complete. You can either cooperate, or we move to the next step." Janet stood abruptly, the movement so sudden that both women turned toward her. Color had risen in her cheeks, her earlier doubt apparently burned away by what she was witnessing. Her phone emerged from her cardigan pocket, fingers hovering over the screen. "Let her go, Simone." Janet's voice cracked on the words, but she held the phone steady. "Let her go, or I'm calling the police." Simone's hand released with calculated slowness, her fingers sliding away from Lorraine's wrist bone by bone. The pale impression of her grip remained, 5 white ovals against brown skin already blooming purple at the edges. Lorraine cradled the injured arm against her chest, feeling her pulse hammer against the abraded flesh. The transformation in Simone's demeanor occurred like clouds passing across the sun. Her shoulders dropped, her face softened into lines of concern, her voice modulated into honey-thick sympathy. "Janet, you're absolutely right. I apologize." She stepped backward, hands raised in surrender, palms open and empty. "The stress of caring for Mother has been overwhelming. I shouldn't have. I just want what's best for her." Janet's phone remained up, though her thumb had moved away from the screen. Uncertainty flickered across her features, the doubt returning, warring with what she'd witnessed. The transformation had been too smooth, too practiced. Lorraine recognized the performance, had seen variations of it dozens of times. Her daughter could shift personas like changing clothes, whatever mask the situation demanded. "I think you should leave." Janet's voice had lost its earlier strength, but she maintained her ground near the doorway. "Lorraine needs time to rest." Simone bent to retrieve her bag, the motion graceful despite the tension crackling through the room. She extracted a business card, placed it on the dry corner of the coffee table with deliberate care. Water continued its slow spread across the wood, darkening the magazines, seeping into the carpet fibers. "When Mother becomes confused again, and she will, please call me immediately." She looked directly at Janet, holding the older woman's gaze with practiced intensity. "I have medical power of attorney. Any decisions about her care need to go through me first." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward with implications. Lorraine felt her stomach clench, bile rising bitter in her throat. Medical power of attorney? The document Simone had convinced her to sign 2 years ago, when everything had still seemed normal. When she'd believed her daughter had her best interests at heart. Janet's eyes shifted toward Lorraine, question marks written in her expression. Lorraine managed a small shake of her head, but the seed had been planted. She could see it taking root. If Simone really had legal authority, if she really was the decision-maker, then maybe everything she'd said earlier held weight. Simone moved toward the door with unhurried steps, her heels clicking against the hardwood in the entryway. She paused at the threshold, glancing back with an expression of perfect maternal concern etched across her features. "Rest well, Mother. I'll check on you tomorrow." The door whispered shut behind her. Through the window, Lorraine watched her daughter descend the porch steps, cross the lawn, climb into the silver Mercedes parked at the curb. The engine purred to life. Brake lights flared red as Simone checked her mirror. Then the car glided away down the tree-lined street. Silence filled the living room like water filling a basement, heavy and suffocating. Janet stood frozen by the door, one hand still clutching her phone, the other pressed against her throat. Her breathing came fast and shallow, confusion and concern battling across her weathered features. Lorraine sank back onto the couch, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The adrenaline that had fueled her resistance drained away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Her wrist throbbed with each heartbeat, the bruises already darkening to deep plum. She pressed her thumb against the marks, feeling the tender ache spread up her forearm. "Is it true?" Janet's question emerged barely above a whisper. "Does she really have authority?" The words required effort, as if Lorraine had to drag them up from some deep well within herself. She nodded, watching Janet's face fall, watching hope leak away like the water still dripping from the coffee table onto the carpet below. "Signed it 2 years ago." Her voice came out hoarse, scraped raw. "Thought I was being responsible, planning ahead." Janet lowered herself into the armchair, moving like a woman suddenly aware of her own age. She set her phone on the side table, but kept glancing at it, as if the device might offer answers. The business card on the coffee table gleamed white against the dark wood, Simone's name embossed in elegant script. "But you're not—" Janet gestured vaguely, searching for diplomatic phrasing. "You're not sick. Not really." Lorraine barked out a laugh, the sound harsh and humorless. She gestured around the immaculate living room, the alphabetized books, the precisely arranged furniture, the family photos in their dust-free frames. "Does this look like someone with dementia lives here?" Yet even as she spoke, Lorraine felt the insidious tendrils of doubt creeping through her own mind. The confusion she'd experienced at the pharmacy yesterday, standing at the counter, unable to remember why she'd come. The morning last week when she'd found herself in the kitchen at dawn, dressed for church though it was Tuesday. Small moments, easily explained, but accumulating like snow on a branch. Janet studied her with new intensity, cataloging details. Lorraine forced herself to remain still under the scrutiny, fighting the urge to fidget or explain. Outside, a car door slammed. Footsteps approached on the sidewalk, then passed by. The afternoon light slanted through the windows at a sharp angle, painting golden rectangles across the floor. "What can I do?" Janet leaned forward, elbows on knees, face lined with concern and something deeper. Fear, perhaps, of being caught in the middle of something bigger than a neighborly check-in. Should I talk to the other neighbors?" "Tell them what I saw?" Hope flared in Lorraine's chest, bright and painful. But before she could respond, her phone buzzed on the end table. The screen lit up with a text message, the preview visible from where both women sat. "Mom, I've scheduled a home health assessment for tomorrow at 10 a.m. Please be ready. Dr. Williams will be conducting it. This is necessary for your safety." Lorraine's hand trembled as she reached for the phone, her fingers closing around it with enough force that her knuckles went pale. The screen dimmed before she could finish reading the message, leaving her staring at her own distorted reflection in the black glass. Behind her, Janet shifted uncomfortably on the couch, the leather creaking beneath her weight. The phone clattered onto the coffee table as Lorraine released it. She stood abruptly, her body moving before her mind had fully processed the decision, and crossed to the window. Outside, Mrs. Chen from 3 doors down pushed her grandson in a stroller, the wheels catching on a crack in the sidewalk. The old woman didn't glance toward Lorraine's house. Nobody did anymore, she realized. They all looked away now, embarrassed or uncomfortable, or convinced she wouldn't recognize them anyway. "I need proof," Lorraine said, her voice steady despite the chaos churning in her chest. "Something concrete that shows I'm competent." "Medical records, bank statements, something?" She moved to the antique secretary desk in the corner, pulling open drawers with swift, precise movements. Files emerged, utility bills paid on time, investment statements showing careful management of her retirement accounts, her volunteer schedule at the literacy center where she tutored twice weekly. Each document she placed on the desk felt like ammunition, evidence in a trial she hadn't agreed to attend. Janet appeared at her shoulder, scanning the papers spread across the polished wood surface. "Your daughter. She must believe it. People don't just make up something like this." The words landed like physical blows. Lorraine's breath caught, her hand freezing halfway to another folder. Because that was the question that had kept her awake through the previous night, staring at the ceiling while shadows shifted across the plaster. Why would Lisa do this? What possible motivation could justify such an elaborate, cruel deception? The front door burst open with enough force to bounce against the wall. Lorraine spun, her hip colliding with the desk corner, pain flaring hot and immediate. A man in his early 40s entered, dressed in khakis and a polo shirt embroidered with a logo she couldn't quite make out. He carried a clipboard and wore an expression of professional concern that made Lorraine's stomach twist. "Mrs. Mitchell?" "I'm Brad Spencer from Comfort Care Home Health Services." He extended his hand, his smile revealing too many teeth. "I know we're scheduled for tomorrow, but your daughter asked me to stop by today since I was in the neighborhood. Just a preliminary assessment to see what support services might benefit you." Lorraine didn't take his hand. She stood frozen, her mind racing through the implications. Lisa had sent him early, catching her off guard, probably hoping to find her confused or unprepared. The calculation in it stole her breath. Janet moved between them, her substantial frame blocking Brad's advance into the room. "Mrs. Mitchell wasn't expecting anyone today. Maybe you should reschedule." Brad's smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened. He pulled a form from his clipboard, holding it up so they could see Lisa's signature at the bottom, bold and unmistakable. "I have authorization from her daughter, who holds medical power of attorney. The assessment is voluntary, of course, but refusing could be noted in my report to Adult Protective Services." The threat hung in the air, delicate and vicious. Lorraine felt her legs weaken, forced herself to lock her knees to remain standing. Medical power of attorney. When had Lisa obtained that? She tried to remember signing anything, granting any such authority, but her memory yielded nothing but fog. "I never gave her power of attorney." The words emerged rough, scraped from somewhere deep in her throat. Brad consulted his clipboard, flipping through pages with practiced efficiency. "According to the documentation filed with your physician's office, Dr. Angela Rodriguez, the POA was established 6 months ago. You apparently expressed concerns about your memory during an appointment, and your daughter was present when you requested the arrangement." 6 months ago. Lorraine gripped the desk edge, her mind frantically searching. She'd had bronchitis in February, had missed several days at the literacy center. Lisa had driven her to an urgent care appointment, insisted on coming back to the house to make sure she took her antibiotics properly. Had there been papers? Had she signed something while fever-fogged and exhausted? Janet's phone appeared in her hand, camera pointed at Brad. "I'm recording this. For Mrs. Mitchell's protection." Brad's professional veneer cracked for just a moment, irritation flashing across his features before the smile reasserted itself. "That's certainly your right. Now, Mrs. Mitchell, if we could just sit down for a few questions. Basic orientation items. What's today's date? Who's the current president? Can you count backward from 100 by sevens?" The condescension in his tone ignited something fierce in Lorraine's chest. She straightened, drawing herself to her full height, despite the pain still radiating from her hip. "Get out of my house." "Mrs. Mitchell, I understand you're upset. Out. Now. Or I call the police." Brad's expression shifted to something uglier, the mask slipping further. He made a notation on his clipboard, his pen digging into the paper with enough force that Lorraine heard it scratch. "I'll note that the patient became agitated and combative when approached for standard assessment. Paranoid behavior, possible delusions of persecution. I'll recommend an immediate psychiatric evaluation." He turned and left, pulling the door closed behind him with exaggerated gentleness. Through the window, Lorraine watched him pause on the sidewalk, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing emphatically. Reporting back to Lisa, no doubt, spinning this encounter into further evidence of incompetence. Lorraine's legs finally gave out. She sank into the desk chair, her entire body shaking with adrenaline and fury, and something that felt dangerously close to despair. Janet crouched beside her, one hand hovering near Lorraine's shoulder, but not quite touching. "We need a lawyer," Janet said softly. "Someone who specializes in elder law." The phrase elder law made Lorraine flinch. When had she become someone who needed that kind of protection? She thought of herself at 40, 50, 60, still vibrant, still certain of her place in the world. Now, at 65, she felt that certainty crumbling beneath her like rotten wood. The law office occupied the third floor of a renovated brownstone downtown, and Lorraine climbed the stairs slowly, refusing Janet's offered arm. Each step sent a dull ache through her hip, but she kept her spine straight, her hand firm on the polished oak banister. The pain was proof of what Lisa had done, physical evidence that couldn't be dismissed as confusion or misremembering. Derek Patterson met them in the lobby, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. His presence steadied something in Lorraine's chest. She'd called him the previous night, her voice shaking as she explained what she needed. He'd arrived at her house within an hour, his truck parked deliberately in her driveway where the neighbors could see it. The attorney's name was Simone Washington. She stood when they entered, tall and sharp-edged in a navy suit that looked expensive. Her office smelled of leather and coffee, and the walls displayed framed credentials from Howard University and Georgetown Law. Lorraine noted the way Simone's gaze traveled across her face, assessing but not pitying. That made all the difference. "Tell me everything," Simone said, settling behind her desk. "Start from the beginning." Lorraine pulled the composition notebook from her purse. Its pages were filled with her handwriting, dates, times, names, incidents. She'd started documenting everything the day after Brad's visit, sitting at her kitchen table until 3 a.m, reconstructing the timeline of Lisa's campaign. The physical act of writing had transformed her anger into something sharper, more useful. She slid the notebook across the polished mahogany surface. Simone picked it up, her dark fingers careful against the worn cover. Her eyes moved rapidly across the pages, and Lorraine watched her expression shift from professional interest to something harder. Your daughter has been systematically building a case for incompetency? Simone said, looking up. The health aid visits, the reports to Adult Protective Services, the conversations with neighbors. These are all standard tactics when someone wants to establish guardianship. The word guardianship hit Lorraine like a physical blow. Janet's hand found hers beneath the table, squeezing once. Derek leaned forward in his chair. What can we do? Simone flipped to a fresh page in her own notepad, her pen moving in swift, decisive strokes. We establish Mrs. Mitchell's competency through medical evaluation. Her choice of doctor, not her daughter's. We document the false statements made to neighbors and authorities. We demonstrate that this is financial abuse, not concern for her welfare. She paused, her pen hovering above the paper. But we need to move fast. If your daughter files for guardianship before we establish our case, the burden of proof shifts. You'd be fighting to prove competency instead of her proving incompetency. Lorraine's stomach twisted. She thought of Lisa in her perfect house across town, probably sitting at her kitchen counter right now, scrolling through real estate listings. Spending money that didn't exist yet, planning a future built on her mother's erasure. What about the police? Janet asked. The assault. I want a civil suit. Lorraine interrupted, her voice cutting through the space. I want this on record, in a courtroom. I want everyone to know what she did. Simone's expression shifted into something that might have been approval. She pulled a thick document from her desk drawer, spinning it around so Lorraine could read the header. Retainer agreement. The letters swam slightly, but Lorraine blinked them back into focus. This won't be easy, Simone warned. Family court is complicated, and your daughter will likely claim she was acting out of genuine concern. She'll bring witnesses, the neighbors, the health aide, possibly Adult Protective Services. She'll paint you as paranoid, unstable, dangerous to yourself. Let her try. Lorraine reached for the pen Simone offered, its weight solid and real in her hand. She signed her name at the bottom of each page, her signature still strong and clear despite the tremor in her fingers. Each stroke of the pen felt like reclaiming something Lisa had tried to steal. They left the office an hour later, Lorraine's purse heavy with copies of documents she'd signed. The afternoon sun hit her face as they stepped onto the sidewalk, warm and bright. Derek walked slightly ahead, his broad shoulders blocking the wind that tunneled between the buildings. Lorraine's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, already knowing what she'd find. 3 missed calls from Lisa. 2 voicemails. A text message that read, Mom, we need to talk. I'm coming over tonight. Don't make this harder than it has to be. She showed the screen to Simone, who'd followed them out to discuss next steps. The attorney's jaw tightened. Don't be alone with her, Simone said. Not until we file the restraining order. If she shows up, don't let her in. Call the police if you have to. But Lorraine was already thinking ahead, her mind moving through possibilities like chess pieces on a board. Lisa wanted a confrontation. She wanted Lorraine isolated, desperate, easier to control. The voicemails probably contained just the right mixture of concern and condescension, designed to make Lorraine doubt herself. Not this time. I'll be there, Derek said immediately. Janet too, if she's willing. Janet nodded, her expression grim. Absolutely. They drove back to Lorraine's house in Derek's truck, the leather seats creaking as she shifted her weight. Her hip throbbed with each bump in the road, but she welcomed the pain. It kept her sharp, kept her focused on what came next. Through the passenger window, she watched the city slide past. Familiar streets, familiar buildings. The whole world suddenly sharper and more dangerous than it had been a week ago. Derek pulled into her driveway, just as a silver Honda turned onto the street. Lorraine recognized it instantly. Lisa's car, hours earlier than the text had promised. Of course. Another test. Another attempt to catch her off guard. Story block 910. Lorraine stepped out of the truck before Derek could cut the engine. Her shoes hit the asphalt with a deliberate slap, her posture straightening despite the protest from her hip. She planted herself at the edge of her driveway, arms crossed, as the Honda rolled to a stop at the curb. Lisa emerged, wearing a cream-colored pantsuit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun that made her face look harder than Lorraine remembered. The expensive leather briefcase in her hand gleamed in the afternoon sun. She approached with measured steps, her heels clicking against the pavement like a countdown. "Mom, you weren't answering your phone." Lisa's voice carried that particular tone, the one she used with difficult clients, smooth and reasonable on the surface. "I was worried." Lorraine didn't move from her position. Behind her, she heard Derek's door open, then Janet's sedan pulling up behind the truck. The sound of car doors closing, footsteps on concrete. Lisa's eyes flickered past Lorraine's shoulder, her expression tightening almost imperceptibly. "I've been busy," Lorraine said. Lisa's gaze swept over the house, lingering on the windows, the front door, calculating. "We really need to talk. Alone would be better." "No." The single syllable hung in the air between them. Lisa's fingers tightened on the briefcase handle, knuckles whitening. She took another step forward, and Lorraine heard Derek move closer behind her, his presence a solid wall of support. "Mom, I'm trying to help you." Lisa's voice developed an edge, the smooth veneer cracking. "People are concerned. Your neighbors have been calling me, saying you're acting paranoid, confrontational. Mrs. Patterson said you practically attacked her husband." "Stop!" Lorraine's voice cut through the performance. "I know about the guardianship petition." Lisa's face went completely still. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, she stood frozen, the mask slipping to reveal something cold and sharp underneath. Then she inhaled slowly, resetting her expression into practiced concern. "Of course you do. I filed it for your protection. You're not thinking clearly. And these people," she gestured vaguely at Derek and Janet, "are taking advantage of your confusion." Lorraine pulled the folded documents from her jacket pocket, the paper crinkling as she held them up. "I have your emails to Dr. Chen. The ones where you requested backdating the dementia diagnosis?" The color drained from Lisa's face. She opened her mouth, closed it, her eyes darting to the papers in Lorraine's hand. The briefcase slipped slightly in her grip before she caught it. You don't understand the context?" "I understand perfectly." Lorraine stepped forward, and Lisa actually stepped back, stumbling slightly on her expensive heels. "You wanted my house. The life insurance money wasn't enough. You needed the equity, the retirement accounts. Everything." Lisa's expression hardened, the pretense of concern evaporating like morning fog. Her shoulders squared, her jaw set in a way that reminded Lorraine painfully of the woman's father during his worst moments. "You're 73 years old, living alone in a house that's falling apart around you? You have no business." "I'm 65. Lorraine's voice stayed level, but her hands trembled slightly. She pressed them against her thighs. "You added 8 years to my age in the petition. Made me sound elderly and incompetent." A dark blue sedan turned onto the street, slowing as it approached. The word police stood out in white letters along the side. Officer Marcus Chen, no relation to the doctor, he'd clarified on the phone, pulled up behind Janet's car and climbed out. His uniform was crisp, his expression professionally neutral as he approached. Lisa watched him come, her face cycling through calculations. She straightened her jacket, adjusted her grip on the briefcase, preparing a new performance for a new audience. "Officer, thank God you're here. My mother has been—" "Ms. Coleman, I'm going to need you to stop talking." Chen's voice carried quiet authority. He positioned himself between Lisa and Lorraine, his hand resting casually near his belt. "We've received documentation regarding attempted fraud and elder abuse. I need you to come with me to the station for questioning." Lisa's mouth opened and closed silently. Her eyes darted between the officer, Lorraine, and the growing number of neighbors emerging from their houses. Mrs. Henderson stood on her porch across the street, phone raised, recording. The young couple from 2 doors down watched from their front yard, whispering to each other. "This is insane." Lisa's voice rose, the professional polish shattering. "She's manipulating you all. She's sick and doesn't even know it. I'm her daughter. I'm trying to protect her, and you're treating me like a criminal." "Ms. Coleman," Chen's voice sharpened. "You can cooperate now, or I can place you under arrest for creating a disturbance. Your choice." Lisa's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She looked at Lorraine one last time, and the naked hatred in her expression made Lorraine's breath catch. No pretense remained, no mask of filial concern. Just rage and entitlement and the fury of someone whose carefully constructed plan had collapsed. "You'll regret this," Lisa said softly. "You're old and alone, and you'll die that way. No one's going to visit you. No one's going to care." She turned and walked to Chen's patrol car with rigid dignity, her heels striking the pavement like hammer blows. Chen followed, opening the back door with practiced efficiency. The door closed with a solid thunk, sealing Lisa inside. Through the window, Lorraine watched her daughter stare straight ahead, refusing to look back. The patrol car pulled away, disappearing down the tree-lined street. Lorraine remained standing in her driveway, her legs suddenly unsteady, her chest tight with emotions she couldn't quite name. Relief, certainly. Grief, surprisingly sharp. And underneath it all, a bone-deep exhaustion that threatened to pull her down onto the concrete. Derek's hand touched her shoulder gently. "Come on, let's get you inside." She nodded, not trusting her voice. Together they walked to the front door, Janet close behind. The neighbors were still watching, still recording, but their expressions had shifted. Mrs. Henderson lowered her phone slowly. The young couple started toward Lorraine's yard, concern evident on their faces. Inside, the house felt different. Lighter somehow, despite the late afternoon shadows. Lorraine sank onto her couch, the familiar cushions embracing her tired body. Derek disappeared into the kitchen, and she heard the tap running, the clink of glasses. Janet sat in the armchair opposite, her weathered hands folded in her lap. "It's done," Janet said quietly. Lorraine nodded, staring at her own hands. The trembling had stopped. "It's done." Storyblock 1010. 6 months later, Lorraine stood at her kitchen counter, sunlight streaming through windows she'd opened wide to catch the spring breeze. Her hands moved steadily as she sliced vegetables for the community potluck, the knife creating precise cuts through red peppers and carrots. No tremor. No hesitation. Just the rhythm of someone who'd reclaimed her own life. The doorbell chimed. Through the front window, she spotted Derek on the porch, holding a cardboard box. She wiped her hands on her apron and crossed the living room, her steps confident on floors she'd recently had refinished. "Package delivery," he said, grinning as she opened the door. "Plus Janet's running late, traffic on the bridge." She gestured him inside. The house had transformed over the months. New paint brightening the walls. Photographs she'd chosen herself replacing the ones Lisa had selected. Plants thriving in corners where light pooled. Derek set the box on the coffee table, then wandered to her bookshelf where her laptop sat open. "Blog's looking good," he said, pointing to the screen displaying her website. Lorraine's Truth, a senior's guide to legal rights. The visitor counter showed 3,000 hits this week alone. She joined him, scrolling through recent comments. Dozens of elderly people thanking her for sharing her story, asking questions about their own situations. She'd answered each one personally, her fingers flying across the keyboard with purpose she hadn't felt in years. "Got another interview request," Derek continued, pulling out his phone. "That podcast out of Portland. They want to talk about financial exploitation." Lorraine nodded, making a mental note. She'd done 6 interviews already, radio shows, online magazines, a local news segment that went viral. Each time she spoke, her voice grew stronger, more certain. The shame that had clung to her for so long had burned away, leaving only determination. Janet arrived 20 minutes later, her arms loaded with folders. She'd taken early retirement from the bank to start a consulting business helping seniors protect their assets. Lorraine was her first official client, though now they worked more as partners than anything else. "County supervisor called," Janet announced, spreading papers across the dining table. "They want us to present at the senior center next month. Full workshop, 2 hours." They spent the afternoon preparing, their heads bent together over statistics and case studies. Lorraine had learned the language of financial abuse, could cite laws and precedents without hesitation. The confusion she'd faked for so long, the very confusion Lisa had claimed was real, had vanished completely once the gaslighting stopped. At 4 o'clock, Derek drove them to the community center downtown. The parking lot overflowed with cars, groups of people streaming toward the entrance. Inside the main hall, chairs had been arranged in neat rows, already filling with neighbors, friends, and strangers who'd heard about the event. Mrs. Henderson approached first, her husband trailing behind. She clasped Lorraine's hand between both of hers, her eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you for organizing this," she said simply. Lorraine squeezed back, remembering the woman's face 6 months ago. Skeptical, dismissive, convinced of Lisa's lies. Now she was here, ready to learn how to protect herself and others. The transformation felt like redemption. The presentation began at 4:30. Lorraine stood at the podium, a microphone clipped to her collar, PowerPoint slides glowing on the screen behind her. She'd practiced this speech dozens of times, but her heart still hammered as she surveyed the crowd. 200 faces looked back, attentive and expectant. She told her story without shame, her voice steady as she described Lisa's manipulation, the forged documents, the systematic isolation. She explained how abusers used dementia accusations as weapons, how easily neighbors and institutions believed adult children over elderly parents. She outlined warning signs, legal resources, protective measures. The room stayed silent except for her voice and the scratch of pens on paper as people took notes. When she finished 40 minutes later, the applause crashed over her like a wave, rising to a standing ovation that made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. Afterward, people lined up to speak with her. An elderly man described his son's attempts to control his finances. A middle-aged woman worried about her mother's new caregiver. A lawyer offered pro bono services for any seniors facing similar situations. Lorraine listened to each story, offered advice, collected contact information. This was her purpose now, turning her nightmare into protection for others. Derek drove her home as twilight painted the sky purple and gold. She leaned her head against the car window, exhaustion mixing with satisfaction in her bones. The house lights glowed welcoming as they pulled into the driveway, and she noticed fresh flowers in the bed she'd planted last month, their petals catching the last rays of sun. Inside, she made tea while Derek checked her security system. New cameras, updated locks, everything Lisa had disabled now restored and enhanced. They sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from their cups, comfortable silence settling between them. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. A woman in Ohio who'd seen the news interview, now successfully fighting her daughter's conservatorship attempt. Another message followed, a support group invitation. Then another, a speaking request from a law school. Lorraine set the phone down and sipped her tea, warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the beverage. Lisa was serving 18 months for fraud and elder abuse, but Lorraine rarely thought about her anymore. That chapter had closed. This new one, advocacy, education, community, felt like the life she was always meant to live. She caught her reflection in the darkening window. A woman who looked younger than her 65 years. Alert eyes, straight shoulders, no trace of the manufactured confusion that had nearly destroyed her. She smiled at herself, a fierce expression full of triumph and possibility. The future stretched ahead, uncertain, but no longer frightening. She'd found her voice, her strength, her truth, and she'd spend every remaining day making sure other seniors found theirs too. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.